Okay, so this is sort of like a part two to my video from yesterday about the Joe Budden podcast episode entitled "Shaking the Tree." I did a review, a reaction to it, and I shared my opinions about it. And I've been seeing a common theme on social media, and particularly on my handle, of and let's just go ahead and just break this and get this on out of the way. I felt like Joe Budden, Rory, and Mal, they all handled it wrong. They handled it the wrong way. Now, to Joe Budden, I feel like Joe Budden handled it like Joe Budden has always handled his decisions in the past. Rory and Mal have a long history with Joe Budden. So they should know how Joe Budden operates, thinks, and performs. Okay? Because Joe Budden has not changed. Okay? Since the beginning stages of Joe Budden when he was a rapper, to being a DJ, being on a radio show, being on Love and Hip Hop, doing Complex, doing Revolt, and doing his own thing on the Joe Budden Network. Joe Budden has established, and he always has been this person. He has not changed. And Rory and Mal has been through Joe Budden through the majority of his history. They have time with this guy. So anything this guy says and does shouldn't come off as a shock to Rory and Mal. All right? Now, when you talk about Rory and Mal and you look at that episode, and if you've been looking at previous episodes, you know that this has been building, okay? And these feelings and the issues that they have with Joe Budden versus Rory and Mal has been this way for a long period of time, ever since that Spotify deal. And I said that clearly on yesterday's video. I talked about how that Spotify deal was the beginning of the end. Okay, where Joe Budden said F to Spotify, and now he's doing his own thing. All right, and those guys have been looking at that deal, thinking the possibilities of them continuing their partnership with Spotify. And Rory and Mal takes offense to Joe Budden's direction and decision from leaving Spotify. Okay? And it's been a downward spiral ever since then. Okay, if you've been checking out other episodes after that episode about them elaborating the Spotify deal. So, a lot of people have been saying in social media, as well as on my handles, and a lot of people are pro Rory and Mal. And I feel like a lot of people can identify and see themselves in the same position of a Rory and Mal as employees. And when you think of the position of the employees, and I've said this in yesterday's video, you should never mix business with pleasure, or business with family, or business with friendship. Okay? Because the lines get blurry. And I feel like a lot of people's lines are blurry, thinking that employees are just as equal or just as important as the employer. And it's never the case, particularly on social media, particularly when the brand is an individual. All right. Now, a lot of people say, well, Rory and Mal, they sacrificed too. They giving up their jobs, their livelihoods to link up with Joe Budden in the early stages, they wasn't making no money. They was basically doing it for free. To that, I say this: you guys act like they gave up their futures and linked up with a nobody. We're talking about Joe freaking Budden. We're not talking about Joe Nobody. All right? At that particular time, Joe Budden still had clout in the hip hop industry. Okay? When you mention the name Joe Budden, it resonates with a lot of people. in hip hop entertainment, in the hip hop industry, in the hip hop culture, and in the movement. Okay. Also, he was making a name for himself on social media and on reality TV. Okay, so he was a brand, he was a personality that if you think that's taking an extreme chance by just quitting your day job just to link up with Joe Budden, you probably couldn't fathom or see Joe Budden making deals with Spotify or Revolt or Complex. You probably couldn't see that far, but you knew this man was going to link up with someone. You know, this wasn't a chance. Okay, you know, you knew the possibilities were there for as far as all three of y'all blowing up. Okay, so you shouldn't get credit for something that was a guaranteed. Okay, that's just my opinion. Like I said, you're not hooking up with Joe Nobody. You're hooking up with Joe Budden. Okay? So the crap of, well, these guys went through thick and thin. They gave up their livelihoods, their jobs. You know, that's past credit. And if we're going to be talking about, if we're going to be adults, and if we're going to keep it funky and correct, if we want to talk about the past, okay, let's talk about Joe Budden's behavior in the past. What make you think that Joe Budden is going to change how he sees and perceives things, on how he talks and communicates towards people in the past? How it's going to be different with Rory and Mal? Now, people are going to say, well, that's his friends. Rory and Mal were his friends. Okay, I understand that. But Joe Budden has had a history of coming at people the wrong way. His own friends, his own family, his ex-girlfriends. Okay? So what makes Rory and Mal different from everyone else? Nothing. Okay? So that's been Joe Budden's blueprint of his attitude, and he still hasn't changed to this day. Okay? Now, let's and like I said in yesterday's video, I feel like this was really spiraling to the conclusion where we're at today. Ever since they did the episode on Joe Budden talking about leaving Spotify. I feel like when he left Spotify and he wanted to go fully independent, that wasn't the move nor the decision Rory and Mal wanted to make. Okay? But they are employers. I mean, they are employees. They're not employers. Joe Budden is the boss. He's the employer. Rory and Mal, Parks, Ice-ish, they are all employees. Yes, you've been with Joe Budden through the thick and thin, the good and the bad, okay? You was there when money wasn't a factor in the beginning stages. But you also knew that this was going to change over a course of time. Where you could be paid by just coming to a show 2 times a week. Okay, you knew that. All right? So let's quit and let's stop the narrative of these guys were sacrificing. Okay, they're not to the extent of sacrificing you guys are trying to perceive on social media. Okay? Like I said, this has been spiraling since since Joe Budden left Spotify. All right? And if you look at the previous episode of Shaking the Tree, they still are worlds apart on, and I still also, as far as negotiations on how moving forward, how we're going to treat each other moving forward. They're miles away. I mean, continents away from that conclusion. And there's a lot of delusion in Rory and Mal. If you look at that episode, they still feel like they're employers. And you just admitted on the podcast that you have a contract with Joe Budden. Not a partnership. You have a contract with Joe Budden, as Joe Budden's your boss and you guys are the employees. Also in that episode, a lot of people are not talking about this or playing this as a factor. They discussed on the podcast that they don't really feel doing the pod. They don't take it that seriously. They treat it like a regular 9-to-5 job. They punch in, they punch out. Okay? They're not going to invest a lot of time outside the podcast. Okay? And they just go out and do their own thing. All right? Rory said that he's not into building his own network, building his own brand. He just basically want to do the podcast and then after he punches in, he punches out and live his best life. Mal says, money is not a factor, but when you look on social media, you see him doing the emoji money bags. It's not a factor on the podcast, but it's a factor when you're at home. I don't know where Mal is going to that point or not. And then he talks about how, he just comes in, he just does his thing, and he's out. He's not invested in podcasts either. To Joe Budden, he clearly illustrated and already knew this. I'm shocked that a lot of people are not aware of this, including Rory and Mal, but this is his livelihood. Okay? So, the fact that these two are clear, when you look at Joe Budden, Rory and Mal, they're looking at this on two different fronts, okay? Joe Budden's looking at it as a boss, okay? Like, this is my livelihood. I am not canceling the podcast for 3 to 4 weeks until we fix things, okay? And Rory and Mal looking at it like, you should have canceled it. Let's get into our feeling bag and let's try to hammer and work things out on how we're going to treat each other moving forward, okay? What Rory and Mal don't understand is, yeah, y'all can cancel the show for like 4 to 5 weeks, but those same viewers, those same followers that come to see and hear you guys, they're not going to return. They're going to move on to the next thing. And that hurts the brand. That hurts the IP. That hurts Joe Budden's legacy. And that hurts Joe Budden. It hurts Joe Budden more than it hurts Rory and Mal because of two fronts. It's not Rory and Mal's show, and Rory and Mal don't care. This is not their livelihood. They're interested in other aspirations. So, I feel like, they may hammer something out moving forward on how they communicate towards one another. But I also feel like when their contracts are up, Rory and Mal is going to want more control and more say so, and more money, doing the podcast moving forward. And I feel like it's not going to be offered because you just demonstrated that the fan base don't care if Rory and Mal's involved, or Ice and Ish is involved, or Parks is involved, or someone new comes in is involved. They're still coming in, watching the Joe Budden Podcast on YouTube, listening to the Joe Budden Podcast on whatever streaming service you have that has a podcast format, and life is going to go on. The podcast did not take a hit because of Roy and Mal was not there. And that was established. And that's why Mal took offense by it. Well, man, why you, he said no offense, but it was offensive about Ice and Ish hosting the podcast. Because these guys clearly want the podcast to just blow up and burn. Okay? To prove their point that they were important to the podcast. The podcast moved on. Life went on, and, people still came and listened and watched the podcast. But Rory and Mal takes offense to it. And these are the two individuals that said that they don't really, they're not, their whole life is not predicated on the podcast. But you take issue to it. And so I just wanted to clear the record. And before I end this, look, Rory and Mal, Joe Budden, they all handled it the wrong way. I can agree with you on that. All right. But you also have to agree that Joe Budden has handled all types of situations the exact same way. That's why, he doesn't keep a lot of relationships with close friends and girlfriends and things of that nature. Because of Joe Budden. But you knew that going in because you already seen him have this type of behavior with other people. What makes you guys different? What makes you guys different from the norm? That's all I got to say. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to answer the comment section on the previous YouTube page. And, it's your boy. I'm up out of here. I'll talk to you guys later. Deuces.